debating presidential politics is basically a fruitless endeavor. At least that's been my experience with it. No matter who you're discussing the basic topic with, you're dealing with somebody who's basically had their mind made up. Now, for the longest time, I just assumed that it was because people were stupid. I had sort of this Bill Maher-like outlook on America, which I should really hit myself for having because, man, do I hate that guy. But anyway, I was scanning around through some old articles, and I found something, actually, believe it or not, in the mainstream media, which sort of sheds a little bit of light, scientific light, if you will, into why this is. Some of you might remember this, but I actually forgot all about it. During the 2004 presidential election, I think it was during the second debate, there was a study done. I put the link for this in the sidebar, and I'm actually going to read this off to you, so if you don't feel like tainting your hands by going on to msnbc.com, I feel dirty just saying the name, especially considering the last video I just did. This way you won't have to. All right. Political bias affects brain activity, study finds. Subtitle: Democrats and Republicans both adept at ignoring facts, as brain scans show. Democrats and Republicans alike are adept at making decisions without letting the facts get in the way, as a new study shows, and they get quite a rush from ignoring information that's contrary to their point of view. Researchers asked staunch party members from both sides to evaluate information that threatened their preferred candidate prior to the 2004 presidential election. The subjects' brains were monitored while they pondered. The results were announced, and to quote the person in charge of the research here, "We did not see any increased activation of the parts of the brain normally engaged during reasoning," said Drew Western, director of clinical psychology at Emory University. "What we saw instead was a network of emotion circuits lighting up, including circuits hypothesized to be involved in regulating emotion and circuits known to be involved in resolving conflicts." Bias on both sides. The test subjects on both sides of the political aisle reached totally biased conclusions by ignoring information that could not rationally be discounted, Western and his colleagues say. Then, with their minds made up, brain activity ceased in the areas that deal with negative emotions such as disgust. But activity spiked in the circuits involved in reward, a response similar to what addicts experience when they get a fix, Western explained. The study points to a total lack of reason in political decision-making. None of the circuits involved in conscious reasoning were particularly engaged, Western said. Essentially, it appears as if partisans twirl the cognitive kaleidoscope until they get the conclusions they want, and then they get massively reinforced for it with the elimination of negative emotional states and activation of positive ones. Notably, absent were any increases in activity of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with reasoning. The tests involved pairs of statements by the candidates, President George W. Bush and Senator John Kerry, that clearly contradicted each other. The test subjects were asked to consider the rate the discrepancy. Then they were presented with another statement that might explain away the contradiction. The scenario was repeated several times for each candidate. Brain scan technique known as functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, revealed a consistent pattern. Both Republicans and Democrats consistently denied obvious contradictions for their own candidate, but detected contradictions in the opposing candidate. The result is that partisan beliefs are calcified and the person can learn very little from new data, Western said. Other relatively neutral candidates were introduced into the mix, such as the actor Tom Hanks. Importantly, both the Democrats and Republicans reacted to the contradictions of these characters in the same manner. The findings could prove useful beyond the campaign trail. Everyone from executives and judges to scientists and politicians may reason to emotionally based judgments when they have a vested interest in how to interpret the facts, Western said. The researchers will present the findings Saturday at the annual conference of the Society for Personality and Social Psychology. Have you ever noticed whenever you try to reason with a particularly zealous supporter of a particular political candidate that you basically get nowhere? I mean, to use the example of Barack Obama, since his minions are the most numerous right now because he's the one in power, you can kind of see how all of this works. You present them with the fact that Obama has been spending like crazy, like a crazed 16-year-old girl with a new set of credit cards and the keys to daddy's car, and they will completely ignore it. They will instead focus on who? George W. Bush. There are always two sides to the equation in order for this to work. You have the opposing force and you have the supported force, supported by on either side by depending on a person's bias, and they just push against each other, and you never get beyond this limited scope, this partisan block, if you will, this box that everybody's stuck into. Now, this doesn't mean that having an ideology is inherently inaccurate or avoiding reasoning. It all depends on how you approach this. Now, I've noticed this was the case with a lot of other things, too. Like if you look at the theory of evolution versus creationism, you will see a broad range of cherry-picking and other logical fallacies used to prop up one's belief. I've debated evolutionists at various points, and I've gotten these results. I've gotten people that have referred time and time again to their opponents as creationists, as if there isn't some sort of middle ground, third alternative, or as if creationism was automatically inaccurate without further discussion into the matter. Now, to be fair, that's not the stance of every evolutionist or every Darwinist. Some of them take time to parse the facts presented by their opponents and actually try to disseminate them and try to debunk them using actual logic. How far they get depends on the individual, but nonetheless, the proper mode of debate and rational discourse is basically nowhere to be found in most of the world today. It's especially absent from politics. So there's not really any way to reason with somebody who is stuck in this paradigm. So how do you approach dealing with these people? Well, there's a couple of different options. There's the Alex Jones option, which involves basically shouting louder than your opponent and beating him down with the facts to the point where he either fights or flights, or fight or flight scenario, basically. And this has had a varying level of success. This was actually somewhat successful in breaking me out of the neoconservative wing of libertarianism, the Neil Boortz brand of libertarianism that I was caught up in years ago. So there's something to it. The other approach is the what I like to call the Voltaire approach, which is witty ridicule of your opponent to the point that, again, they either reach a fight or flight scenario. If you're debating somebody and they have their head stuck on a similar in the same ideological block, they're not getting out of it, you have to really disrupt the box they're in. You essentially have to tear a hole in the box. And if somebody, gives you a fuck you and walks off, something, you got a biased, unhelpful idiot out of your hair. So, I mean, it's not a total loss. So, trying to reason with somebody who's already got their mind made up, I don't think really accomplishes much. There are probably calmer alternatives to this, but I don't know how you get them. But anyway, this is an interesting read, and again, like I said, if you don't want to taint yourself by being on the MSNBC.com website, then just take my words verbatim. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.